Welcome everybody to our second Calling Conversations, a series where we explore different types of vocation and calling, speaking to people who are actively involved in particular ministries. This week, we look at Pioneer Ministry. Pioneer Ministry looks at where God is working in the world and looks to join in with that. It's not just evangelism, it's not just doing lots of missional activities, it's about seeking God's work and growing new communities where God calls people to be. It's got many facets. It can look different wherever context it grows up in. And we've got a great panel of people here to speak to us about it today. I'm the Reverend Matt Davis and I'll be hosting. And I'm going to start off by asking our panels just to give a quick elevator pitch for us about who they are, where they're from and what they're doing at the moment. So I'm going to start off with John, please go ahead.
Good evening everyone, it's wonderful to be with you. My name is John Price. I minister in Mid Wales, specifically around a little town called Llanidloes. I'm an ordained pioneer minister. I have some oversight and responsibility for some quite trad parish work, but I'm also involved in developing a fresh expression of church for families and helping other churches to think about how they might develop pioneer ministry where they are too. So thrilled to be with you all this evening.
Susie.
Hi, my name is Susie. I am a pioneer curate in just outside Reading, actually in the Diocese of Oxford, and I am looking after a parish church in vacancy and growing a fresh expression among people, so Christians who are on the margins of church, and we're thinking about a new way to be church and how we can serve our community.
Well, thank you. Debbie.
Hello, I'm Debbie Peck and I'm a pioneer youth worker for Bangor Diocese, and I live and work in the heart of Mid Wales, so rural ministry is our thing. I work very closely with John Price, who's also on the panel, and I am really privileged to have the opportunity to work with young people, to build relationships with them, to earn myself the right to be able to speak with them about how God's love can transform their lives. So it's a real privilege. Thank you.
Thank you. And David.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's David. I'm in the Romford area, just on the border of Essex, just outside of London. I'm a third-year pioneer curate here at my church, and I've explored many different ideas and using imagination to explore how do we engage with our community. Something particularly I'm probably known for is I run a boxing community that explores faith and boxing and those kind of elements, as well as dabbling in lots of other areas of discovering church in different forms, as well as partnering with a hub to license and authorise lay pioneers with CMS in the diocese.
And last but not least, Jo.
Hi, I'm Jo. I'm a lay pioneer based in Derby City Centre. I'm employed by the Methodist Church here, and my role is a bit of a funny role. It's a dual role, and it's to the city centre, but also to a new housing estate which is being built on industrial land here in the city. I'm also a co-director of Sacred Bean Coffee, which is a community interest company set up to train and employ people with barriers to employment, such as ex-offenders.
Oh, wonderful. Well, we're going to get on to a moment, the sort of, I suppose, nitty-gritty, the interesting stuff about what you're actually doing and what you're taking part in. But I thought it'd be good just to hear, as this is about calling and vocation, about what exactly calling means to you. So if you could give us a sentence, a thought, a phrase about what it means to you, that would be great. So who am I going to pick? Susie.
So vocation, calling, for me, it's about discovering more about who I was created to be. So it's a sense of being on a journey towards like that vision of who Susie is that God holds, rather than what I hold currently.
John?
I think that for me, when I think about calling, I think about belonging to the body of Christ, and how each of us has a place in the body of Christ, and discerning what you're passionate about, and using that passion to build and to grow that body, you know, using the skills and the gifts that God has given us. So yeah, for me, calling is about belonging to a body, the body of Christ, and seeing that grow in exciting ways.
Thank you. Joe?
Similar to Susie, really. I think that calling is something that's inherent, but it's not always obvious. So it's about kind of discovering more about the person God intended you to be.
Debbie?
To be really honest, sometimes I feel food calling me from the fridge or the cupboard, right? Especially when I need a sugar rush. But that is something where I am tempted to something. But for me, calling is when there's something where God is tugging at you, and it might not make rational sense or logical sense or worldly sense to follow that path, but there's something in you that feels drawn to it and pulled along towards it. So it's sort of like a longing, and that you're being tugged in that direction for me. And it is amazing seeing who God, when you answer that call, how God changes you and uses you to do things that you never thought you were ever capable of doing. I just think it's amazing.
And David?
Well, because I'm last, I would have said exactly what everyone else said, but I definitely agree with Debbie that food calls me in the night, but I'm always gutted that Pizza Hut never calls me up and asks me if I want pizza, but I always have to call them. But I think that in my mind, you know, especially what everyone else says, but I think that we're all called to be disciples of Christ in some way, shape or form, whatever that looks like, whether it be ordained, pioneer, not a pioneering. But I think particularly it's about thinking, how does that get outworked? How do we, as others have said, discover our gifts of who we are? How do we become more of ourselves? And in particularly thinking in a pioneering context is how does that take shape? How does that take form? Because what it looks like in the church may look very different outside the church, and especially when you're working with people who haven't particularly engaged with faith or spirituality before, it will look very vastly different. And so it's just having that awareness or having that lens to kind of realize that when you're in that space or when you're becoming that person, what kind of form of church or spirituality are you trying to engage with, or what may grow from that? And in that process, who might you become in and through engaging with people who are on the margins particularly?
Thank you. Some fantastic answers there. I think that's really helpful to keep in mind as we think about this next question here, which is sort of one of the reasons why I invited you all to be here is because I know you all have some fantastic stories and you have some some good experience of pioneering as well, and so the first question really to get to the grips of what we're doing is how did you feel called to, how did you end up where you are today? I'm wondering whether first person to kick us off could be John for this question.
Thanks, Matt, for talking first. Yeah, I guess that to put this as briefly as possible, I guess that for me, Matt, how did I end up where I am today? I guess I was born and raised in the middle of rural Wales. For the first 18 years of my life, I attended a fairly traditional run-of-the-mill Anglican church. But even I could see at the time I set to leave to go to university that church was facing problems. There were issues. It was becoming disconnected. People were beginning to view it as just a group of like-minded people getting together. And about this time, I felt was the first time I tangibly felt God's call on my life. And it's funny, isn't it, how God calls us to where he wants us to be, because I was scratching my head. I had no great ambition for ordained ministry. I didn't think that's where God was calling. And one day I stumbled across an advert for Church Army, and I ended up going to take a year out with Church Army. And it was like lighting a match to a fuse, when you're in the place that God needs you and wants you to be, to grow, just like has just been said, really. And it really did knock some of the corners of my more traditional parish thinking off. I met some wonderful people, got involved with some wonderful work, but also at that time, Church Army were at the heart of a national conversation about how church could be shaped by mission. And that was quite a new idea, even back then, Steve. And, so this phrase I heard for the first time, fresh expressions of church. So there was a new emerging church, and this new emerging church needed new leaders. And I didn't think I could do that. The traditional background I came from, I didn't think I was fitted for this ministry, this new ministry, new ways of being church. But that's where God called me, and I became a Church Army evangelist. And I guess my ministry was about taking everything that's good and enriching and life-giving about Christian community out to the people who were beyond church walls. And that led to a really exciting time. We developed a fresh expression of church for young people called Explore, which I think last time I checked is still going today. But in the back of my mind, there was this little niggle, and that was God's call to the local Welsh church. The church I'd grown up in, and how did everything I'd learned apply to this church that was starting to struggle? And that's when I started my conversation with my DDO. And by that time, Ordained Pioneer Ministry was becoming more accepted. So it was an easier conversation to have, perhaps, than it would have been originally. And one thing led to another, and I was very lucky because I was the first Ordained Pioneer Ministry in our diocese. A lot of people who took a lot of risks. So I feel very blessed to have ended up where I am. But in a nutshell, that's it.
Yeah, does that resonate with anyone in terms of the journey which John went on at all? So.
It seemed to go in loops. And I knew I was destined to come back to Wales, but Church Army took me to Sheffield, to Scotland, to Sheffield, and then the English border before coming back into Wales. And there's a sort of frustration built into that about not knowing exactly what's going on, and the need to learn to trust and to let go. But looking back with hindsight, and I am Captain Hindsight, it's possible to see, so how God was at work, and how I feel I've been built up for a particular ministry in a particular place at a particular time with a particular people. But when you're going through it, you don't understand the jigsaw bits, dear.
Yeah, I spent most of my 20s kind of drifting and thinking, oh, well, I'll do that fun thing and I'll do that fun thing, and I'll go traveling here, and it was really fun, but I never really kind of knew where I was headed. I had through it, the thread for me probably was trying to explore what mission would mean in my life through all the ups and downs of your 20s. And then I kind of hit a bump. Actually, I was trying to I was doing like video production. I did a master's in documentary film, and I thought that part of my calling was to go into, not into like media, but in using media in mission, and using media for churches to communicate between mission partners. And I ended up doing a bit of a job, and it all just kind of collapsed a bit towards the end of my 20s. And I was like, great, I spent most of my adult life trying to get towards this thing that it's not bringing me joy anymore, let alone the opportunities have run out. So I remember having a bit of a moment where I was like, right, I just need to get a job. I just need to earn enough money to not have to live with my parents anymore. And then we'll figure stuff out. I need a bit of a breather. I just want to have a normal life for a couple of years, and we'll sort it out. And so I was like applying for jobs, and I ended up getting a job with the Methodist Church, employing me to be a partial worker on a naval base, on a naval training base. I was living in Portsmouth. So essentially I just got paid to hang out with sailors, which was great fun. And I spent 3.5 years doing that, and it was while I was there that some of these puzzle pieces started fitting into place, and I sort of started to see a shape of something. Felt like, oh, maybe, you know, well, no, actually, because I was hanging out with a whole load of vicars all the time, everyone was like, so you're going to be a chaplain? And I was like, no. And I really resisted it for a long time. And then I went to a conference and had a moment with God. And it wasn't in like all the sort of charismatic Holy Spirit stuff. It was like in the shower, like in the middle of normal life. And I was like, oh, okay, like you're really telling me to pursue this. So I decided that I needed to. And for me at that point, it was obedience rather than this is what I'm called to, you know. But people just kept saying, yeah, that's a good idea. And I was like, no, what are you doing? I remember a conversation with my best friend, who I've known since I was 6 years old. We used to live next door to each other, and she's not really got a faith, but I was quite nervous to tell her, really, because I've always been open about what I believe, and she's seen, you know, the ups and downs of it. But it felt like I want to train to be a vicar feels like quite something removed from kind of like what people in their late 20s were doing at that point. And I remember her saying to me, well, isn't that where your whole life has been pointing? And I was like you're the one supposed to tell me that it's a ridiculous idea. And you know, I like actually looking back at, like with John, you know, it's like, oh yeah, okay, they didn't make sense. All the things I was doing didn't make sense. It felt like I was bouncing around a bit in my 20s. And now stuff, still a lot of questions, don't get me wrong. Some days it's like, what am I doing? But actually, yeah, stuff is beginning to make more sense, and I'm drawing on those experiences because they've made me who I am. And that's why I said at the beginning, you know, part of this for me is really a journey of discovery of who has God made me already to be, that I'm sort of learning about that as I grow older. But yeah, it was all about the Navy for me, so.
Oh.
I suppose in some way, I feel like your lives cross over with other people's stories. When they share theirs, you have those pegs you can hang your story onto when they're sharing theirs. So what I would say is I didn't come to faith until I was in my 20s. So like Susie, I certainly resonate with exploring all of what life had to offer at that time. But particularly I lived in a council residence, which is just a stone's throw from the church. It's directly opposite the other side of the church. And even though I kind of went to the Sunday service, I would say that more than I would say necessarily church, but I went there and kind of experienced something very freeing, something that kind of allowed me to be more of myself, and a place where I felt loved and welcomed, which I did really value. And obviously it really kind of impacted me, the message of the gospel and those kind of elements of that tradition. But yet there was something about living in a communal experience in the flats that was kind of more enriching. It was something about living there that taught me more about what community was and what that looks like, and how you share life with other people, more than I experienced in the church. And the church's perception was it was trying to get everyone across the road into the church. And I think my perception was always I wanted to get everyone from the church into the flats, because I thought they understood something a bit more about living, because you had no option to go anywhere, because all of life was on show. If you had an argument in the stairwell, it was like, you know, it was on for everyone to hear. So there was that element of thinking, oh, well, what does faith look like here? What does spirituality look like in this place? And I thought about, you know, how does something become church, and how do people get to participate in the saying of what it becomes? And I think that I was really engaged with that element as I explored faith, really, and particularly when I did my encouragement to get ordained came from other people recommending it more than I kind of willingly went wanting to. And but it was trying to think, well, how does this work? Because I want to be in the flats with these people. I'm not really sure I want to be there always on a Sunday, although I do appreciate it and love it at times. There was parts of me that was drawn to that place. So I always kind of had that kind of inkling to think, well, how can I use my imagination? How can I allow God to draw others in to be a part of the shaping of what church becomes, rather than a formula in which I just say, here it is, this is church, this is what you do. And I think for me that was always kind of the essence of, I suppose, where my pioneer journey began, really, or the experience of it led me to thinking about being ordained as a pioneer, as opposed to a kind of a more holy, run-of-the-mill Sunday priest, which are great, by the way. They're all great. They're great.
Saved it, just.
I've never, ever, ever thought that I'd be working for the church, ever. And I just find it amazing. I think God's got an amazing sense of humour and a lot of fun. You know, my background is drama and community arts, and I just never pictured that I would be where I am now. And it's quite incredible. But when you feel God pulling you somewhere, if you're obedient and you go with it, then he really does honour that promise. And I just feel like he's really enriched our lives in so many ways. And I never thought I'd be doing what I'm doing now. To be called to something, I think sometimes calling can sound much more complex and highly spiritual. And I just feel like God has been there walking alongside all the time, even when in my 20s I was having a wild time and having a lot of fun and living a very secular life. Even though I was a Christian, I was having a good time, traveling, doing all sorts. I find it amazing that God has been with me all the way, and that those experiences shape you and they make you relatable, because it sounds to me like all of us on this panel have a real yearning to be with people who are not the normal church. They're not conventional in that sense, and we've perhaps had in our experience that's give us a chance to explore something different and to be something different and to represent something different to those people as well. But I also think to be called you can be called to be the best cup of tea maker in your church with the biggest smile and make people welcome. I think everyone has a calling. It just, we all have a part to play together, and some of us all stride out and want to lead. Some of us would rather be in the background, but we can be the ones that build relationships and gather people, and we welcome them. We've all got a part to play, and I think everybody who's watching this has got a calling. They've just got to sort of ask God what that is. Where do you want me to go?
I think
Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think also it can change, you know, like it's not a static thing that we're moving towards in terms of what we do. And like our understanding of our calling develops, but also different times and seasons as well, you know. I felt so called to what I was doing when I was in the Navy, which is why it seemed ridiculous to me to leave it, to go and train for 6 years before I could come back again. But actually it got to the point where I was like, actually, no, this is the right step to move into. So yeah, that idea of calling being like this holy kind of unquestionable like destiny, like I think it's much more an expression of our relationship with God as we grow, you know, as we go through life. and yeah, something that is fluid in that way, I guess.
Yeah,
because it's centered on who we're called to be his children, you know, rather than what we're actually doing with our lives. Does that make sense?
I mean, for me, a lot of it has been trial and error. I know you kind of, I remember hearing people talking about calling, and people seemed so kind of, you know, assured in themselves and so clear in their calling, in what God wanted of them, and felt completely lost that, you know, God wasn't talking to me in that way. You know, we'd not had a audible conversation where he'd given me kind of my path really clearly, and I kind of felt a bit left out with it. And for me, I think it's been just kind of constantly, you know, seeking God for what I should be doing, but you know, within that there's been wrong turns. You know, there's been things that I've tried and they've helped me to work it out. You know, it's all been part of a process. When I returned to faith in my mid-20s, I thought ministry meant working for the church. I didn't realize there could be kind of any other ministry. I didn't think, you know, the concept of kind of going out into the world and kind of ministering where you're at in your everyday jobs and that kind of thing, that just didn't register for me. And I actually went to Bible college after a few years because I felt that was what I should do. I don't think there was a genuine calling to go at all. But God was certainly in it, because it was there that I discovered that wasn't what I should be doing. So I learned something from going, if nothing else. And actually I did feel, you know, I did feel God was speaking to me when I was there, because I felt a sense that God could use who I was. And prior to going, I'd been running a business, and I actually thought that had been incompatible with my faith. You know, looking back, it seems kind of a crazy thought, but where I was at the time, it felt incompatible. And no, I felt, you know, when I was there, you know, that God could use that, if that's where my passions, you know, were, if that's what I was good at, that then God would use it. And you know, there's been other wrong turns along the way, and I'm really fortunate to be where I am now. And there was a comment on that someone's posted, James. He said the church still really struggles to release people to spend time outside the building, and I am in such a fortunate position that, you know, I am being paid to do that, and I'm not tied to a traditional model of church, and there's no criticism to people who feel called to that, but you know, but I don't, and I'm doing a job I love. But it has been a long road to get here. It hasn't been kind of clear cut and really obvious along the way. But yeah, I'm very fortunate.
I think that's a really interesting thing you mentioned about the sort of the trial and error, and actually things not being an easy path, because it'd be quite easy to talk about, you know, some wonderful stories, but actually wonderful stories come after messing up a lot, at least in my experience. You know, there's a lot of failure there, and then we get to the good stuff. And I think it's the it's going to touch on James's point there, and sort of just lead us into a bit of thinking about that, about how we view because I would consider myself a pioneer as well, and how we view what we do, and the sort of how we go about doing what we do. You know, how we look about what we do, how we look about doing something new. What I suppose what I'm asking is, in a very convoluted way, I do apologise, is for instance, can we give some examples about what would be a pioneering thing that we've done, and how we've done that, and what some of the joys of that, what are some of the pitfalls, what are the things we've overcome to see that happen, maybe, and is there anything which you'd sort of advise people if they were thinking, like, maybe this pioneer thing is for me, like how may they be able to maybe take the first step What are some things, you know, learn from our failures, learn from our mistakes, and take a good step forward, and maybe avoid some bruised knees on the first step. Is that okay? Who wants to take that very long paragraph of a sentence?
We're all staying very quiet. Sorry, Matt.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay.
I think one of the big conceptual things we need to do as a church is to face up to our fear of failure. I mean, as human beings, we need to, but like we should be, as a church, we should be embracing that, because like on a theological level, the gospel is what tells us that death is no longer the end, right? So somehow, you know, we need to be able to handle that process of trying something and it not working, but we're still really embarrassed and awkward about it for the most part, I think. So I think there will be countless stories and experiences along the way of, yeah, that didn't really work, or that didn't. And sometimes it's about, I think, timing. Sometimes it's about the people that you have around you, or that you don't. Sometimes you have a really great team, but actually just life gets in the way, you know, because inevitably everyone's got, you know, you might be lucky enough to be released to do this full time, but probably the people that you're working with aren't. And so actually respecting that this is a holistic vocation, we can I find I have loads of ideas. I have all these ideas like non-stop, like every day, 10 before breakfast, but what can actually move forward is a really different question. A lot of the work for me is in trying to discern that alongside the people that I'm with at that time for that project or whatever. It's like, what do we feel God's calling us to together? Because the times when I've rushed ahead and said, oh, we should just do this because it's my brilliant idea and I can see the vision, you know, but people are like, oh, okay. And inevitably, if you're in a leadership role, I don't know what anyone else has found, but there is an element of like, oh, well, she knows what she's doing, so let's just go along with it, you know, which isn't necessarily true, actually. So I think, yeah, there's definitely, like, it's just kind of been an experience of mine that I need to stop and not rush into things. Like, stop, listen to God, listen to the context, and listen to the people that I'm trying to work with.
Yeah, there's probably something there about, I would say, learning to be present with people, and knowing that that will take time, and not that, you know, it won't happen overnight. And I think there's also that element of knowing that you are enough when you are present in a place, that by being yourself and being who you are is enough there, and not to always think, oh, I have to be doing something in some way, but just by being present and being able to listen, to pray, to invite others in, to hear what they think about what good looks like in their community, and how you could probably be, I know Susie's a fan of the word fertilizer, you can fertilize the goodness of that place where that's already taking place. You don't have to feel like you're the one who has to do it, or you're the one who has to drive it. You're just there to be the host of the goodness that is already in place. And I think learning that skill is quite hard, because I think in our churches we always want to give people things, or we want them to be able to consume the stuff that we do, or, you know, and I think we're very good at becoming the hosts of everything, instead of actually learning to be the guest in a place, and learning to be a guest into people's lives. And I think there can be such an eagerness, and a really good eagerness in a real nice way, but it can be, you could become too eager that you miss the presentness of being there. And I think you have to learn to be invited and learn the skill of being the guest before we can rush ahead to always hosting all our great ideas, as much as they may be brilliant, but you know, maybe not at the right time in the right place.
For me, it's really key to build relationships, as well as my specific work with Pioneer Youth Work. I work with John, and we work with the community as well, the wider community. And for me, it's about really being genuine and building relationships with people and listening to them and trusting in God and feeling God helping you with those people. Because and what you said, David, about it can take time. We've been working there 3 or 4 years, and now we're starting to see people genuinely trust us and like us. And I'm seeing with my young people now that it takes years, and building those relationships with them, that they know you really do care, and that they can see there's something different that you offer to the rest of the world. Just the relationship building for me is key. And then, well, that's how it is for me with my faith anyway. It's sort of that relationship with God is what helps me build relationships with other people. And then I hope that through us, they see a bit of God and become curious and want to know more. But yeah, so relationship building, I would say, if you are feeling drawn towards pioneering, to speak to people, but also to start building relationships in your own community. Care about people, genuinely care about them, and listen to them, and find out where God is already working in that community and how you can help with it. But that's enough from me.
I just add something I think Debbie said is very important. Is the way that, in my experience, pioneering is never something that should happen in isolation. I'm a firm believer that even if it's just another person, you know, so that God gives you the gift of people around you to share in the journey of pioneer ministry. But more than that, picking up on what Debbie just said, I got to be careful how I word this, perhaps, but sometimes, you know, so in that desire to build relationships, people can feel as if they're being done to. But that's almost a misnomer. It's to misunderstand the essence of pioneer ministry, because and I know that one of the I'm not very good at keeping up with the the language of pioneer ministry, but there's this idea of co-creating. Sort of from the very beginning, you're a companion. You know, you're a fellow journey person with these people, and whatever develops comes out of a two-way conversation between you and them. It's not just you coming up with the next good idea. It's stuff that happens organically and naturally and springs up from your relationship with those people. It can never be about the next big shiny event. Yes, and that's something we've learned. And just coming back to what David said, that can be very simple sometimes. It can be as simple as giving some, you know, sharing food around the table, sort of on a busy Friday evening. You know, it needn't be rocket science, but the fruit of those relationships, you know, the fruit that those relationships can yield is just amazingly powerful. So I would say never, I don't think pioneer ministry is meant to take place in isolation, but I think the emphasis is on co-journeying, co-creating, and being in it with the people whom God has sent you to live with. That's really important.
Yeah, I think the word itself, you know, pioneer or pioneering, you know, it can be a little bit scary, really, because you kind of feel that you need to be there kind of coming up with all these creative ideas, and you should be out there doing, like, you know, wacky things or whatever. But actually, it's just so much simpler than that. You know, yourselves, other pioneers that I know, for most people, it is just about relationships. And, you know, John used the word organic, and it is about, you know, things that grow naturally. And I know, you know, I've been in my role here for 2 years, and, you know, I'd be lying if I said I didn't come with loads of ideas. But, you know, you've got your own agenda, but then when you come, you know, you kind of have to be willing to kind of sacrifice that, because, you know, other things happen, and you've really got to be led by the people you're working with, and really focused on them. And I've done something in the past called Partnership for Missional Church, and use the phrase announcing the kingdom, and it's recognizing and naming when you see God at work. And I think that's what we need to do as pioneers when we're, in context, is listening and seeing where God is already at work and saying, I see the kingdom of God in this, and I want to be a part of that, and really being led by the Holy Spirit in it.
And that just, so that just reminds me so much of something I once heard. I can't remember who said it, but this idea that when you take up pioneer ministry, one of the first things you have to do is be willing to suspend your preferences, the things that you like, the things that you think are right. You've got to be willing to put all that to one side. I found that hugely challenging, but it is part of that building a genuine relationship, isn't it? And yeah, Joey just reminded me of that. But be willing to suspend what we want and what we like. So important.
I think Debbie touched on it. I think there's a thing of keep your ideas until you're asked for them. Almost is that actually there is a time when that actually will shine, but it's when people get to know you and you've earned that trust and you've earned your place there, and it's then that's actually, I think that's when it will be less on doing this to you to then get you to be a bum on the seat, and it's more that co-creation and doing with, isn't it? Because then it's the shared idea as well. There's much more communication there, which is a bit of energy around it. That's great. Cool. So in terms of pioneering then, and in terms of what it is, what does making a difference look like to you? Or to put it another way, what does a good day look like to you? If you could sum up a good day for you. So you leave or you may be online at this point or whatever, but what does wake up in the morning or you go to bed at night and you think back on your day, and you've had a good day. So what is a good pioneering day for you?
I think for me, it's feeling that I've had a really positive connection with someone. So I was actually having a really bad day last week. I was caught up in safeguarding admin. We've all been there, and we've had to do an audit recently, and it was draining the life out of me. It's like not my strong point. And it was such a bad day. And I thought, I'm just going to go out for a little walk. And I got about 5 meters from my front door, and I bumped into a neighbour, and we ended up standing outside and chatting for ages. I think it was about an hour, and it was just a really, really good conversation. And I felt like we'd connected on a deeper level. We'd talked about some stuff, in the community, and I felt like we'd moved a step forward in that relationship. And I didn't go on my walk because I just spent all that time talking, so I ended up coming back in just to carry on with my safeguarding so I could get it done. But I really felt like kind of I'd been lifted by doing something that had given me some life, and it had just been a chance encounter. But that's one of the things that I love about my job, being here in the context. Those chance encounters happen all the time, just hanging out here, just going to my local coffee shop, popping into the shop, my kids playing on the park just outside. That's where these encounters happen, and I think God's in those moments.
Yeah, when you see the fruit of relationships that you've invested in, whether they're intentional or a little more surprising, because I find there's a mixture. Like for me, it's about so one of the conversations I've been having in some circles is about metrics, like how can you, like the sort of standard church metrics about how many people come on a Sunday and how many people get baptized and all of that sort of stuff. They're all very numbers based. Like for me, one of my metrics just personally is how much trust do they put, like, how do they trust me with their stories? Do they trust me to share that they're having a bad day, you know? And that kind of like pastoral role, that chaplain's role, I guess, that you might have in your community. Do they, I don't really, you know, if they turn up at church, they turn up at church, do you know what I mean? But when they tell me that they're really struggling with, you know, that their mum's ill, and actually that's really hard, the facade breaks down, you know. I'm like, actually they trusted me with that, and you know, maybe they thought that I could help, maybe they didn't, but you know, it's that kind of, it's those moments, I think, for me, that are like, yeah, this is a good day, not because people are struggling, but because those relationships are starting to mature, and that's the conduit through the grace of God can then come into that relationship, because there's trust there, I think.
Hannah's put something great in the chat about, for me, a good pioneering day is having a good, genuine question with someone about life, about hope, about faith, just hanging out and having a cuppa for people. And it, following on from you, Susie, just for me, a good day. I had a good day today. I've been at the high school where I'm the chaplain, and I've been talking to the year 11s who are just finishing, and it's been a really tough year. And how privileged do I feel today? We've been chatting with all the youngsters. They've been telling me what their plans are when they leave school now, or what they're doing. And just to have young people trust you enough to be, hi Deb, how are you? And then telling you what's going on and what they've been doing at the weekend. That to me is a great day, and just really loving it. And all those little sort of moments where God puts you in the right place at the right time. So I'm coming back from your chaplaincy. I just happened to see someone on the side of the road. I stopped to say hello because I knew them, and they needed a lift. And to be able to give them a lift somewhere, and them going, oh, thanks. And just knowing that God is providing little opportunities all the time for you to love people, care for them, and react and respond with them. And I just love it. I love people, basically. And I think a good day for me is when I've had the opportunity to be around people and to speak to them and to earn that right to talk to them about God. And that's amazing. So, yeah, thanks Hannah for sharing your comment. It's really good.
I suppose I would say a good day for me is recognising that not every day is a good day, because not every day is full of good things, and not everything goes kind of the way I want it to, or the way I think it should, particularly when I wake up anyway. And I think that a good day is when I'm able to sit down at the end of that day and reflect on the kind of things that I thought have gone well, and how I'm able to reflect and take time to kind of just reassess that day and think about, you know, where could it have been different? How could I have been different? And not so much focus on everybody else, but trying to more focus on myself and how I may kind of respond differently for the next day or the next week, or whenever that may come. And I think it's also about how, like I said earlier, about how do we find that goodness in the community or in that day, that we can, instead of continuously take our disappointments and those kind of things that frustrate us, but how we learn to leave those in every day. How do they learn to die, so that I can take the life of every day with me into the next. And I think there's just a process of that death and resurrection that each one of us has to take, you know, metaphorically every day, as we kind of let the things of the day that aren't so good die away, and how we take the life of what that day gives to give life in the next. And I think that's an important element, particularly in pioneer ministry, because it can get very lonely, or you can get disheartened very quickly. And I think it's just trying to remember the goodness of each day that comes your way, and to learn when it doesn't when it doesn't go so well, because yeah, if you're anything like me, you're going to probably mess it up quite a lot, so it's all right.
I'd echo that actually, and I'd say that for me, a good day is knowing. I've always thought of pioneer ministry as coming out of a rhythm of life, and it's something we talk about in our little mission community. And you know, on the one hand, you're tracking God inwardly as a disciple, as a follower of Jesus. You want that depth, you want to cultivate that relationship, and then from that relationship, there's that tracking God outwardly in mission. And a good day for me is when I get the balance in that rhythm right. You know, so I think that you walk into the purposes that God has for you. I firmly believe this when you're focused on building a relationship with Him. You're faithful in the little things. You know, you focus, and then your pioneer ministry sort of comes out of that relationship that you have with God, and then from that relationship come those fantastic moments where somebody, you know, that relationship you've been working on, all of a sudden there's a friend request on Facebook, or there's an invitation to go for coffee, or you know, there is that sense of privilege when something's gone wrong, and the first person they call is you, because they want you to come up, they want you to be part of it, they want you to, you know, sort of journey that chapter of their lives with them, whatever it is that has gone wrong. So it is about that rhythm, tracking God inwardly as a disciple and follower, and then, you know, tracking Him outwardly in mission. And then sometimes when that gets out of sync, it can be bad for you, it can be bad for your mental health, it can be bad for your spiritual health, it can be bad for your family's health. So yeah, really focusing on getting that bit right.
Thank you. So we had a question a moment ago from James, which was asking, kind of directed at David about boxing, but it was also about chaplaincy and sports chaplaincy, and exploring what mission looks like within chaplaincy. And I know there's a bit of a few of you have chaplaincy experience and doing mission within that. So I'm going to sort of direct it at David, but also other people can jump in to that question as well. I don't know. Yeah, David, go for it.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say I'm an expert on sports chaplain or any kind of form of sports ministry. It just so happens that in my community that I was a part of, like I said, I lived in a council residence. It was by spending time there that we talked about our younger lives. And if, you know, when I was a young lad, we got into all sorts of things that went and took place. And, you know, and these other guys were talking about their life experiences, and we were sharing how difficult it was to get to gyms and having young children and all those kind of things. And one of the guys in that communal space said about, wouldn't it be good if we had something like a boxing club to go to? And then so from there, it birthed itself really from that need in the community, that then I thought, laying in bed that evening, maybe God's calling me to respond. So I kind of got some seed money together and did some training. And we basically opened up a kind of training session once a week where the local community came along, particularly this neighbour who invited family, friends, and it grew by word of mouth. And yeah, we explored what does faith look like in that place? How does spirituality find or theology take shape, or church in some sort of way? And yeah, we've always asked the question, what does it mean to be physically healthy, but what does it mean to be spiritually healthy? If there is such a thing as spiritual health, I'm sure there must be somewhere, but and so we explore that. And what does discipleship look like there? What does worship look like there? What does prayer look like there? What does engaging with scripture look like in that place, where we've done lots of different things of Maundy Thursday at local curry house. We've done a kind of Cluedo murder mystery kind of ideas about betrayal. We've explored baptism. We created a boxing ring in the church, and we put the pool in the ring, and then we baptized 5 of the guys. But it's also about how do they get to shape, or how do they get to participate in asking questions about faith? How do they get to say, this is the kind of church we want to be a part of? And I remember one particular time really struck me quite vividly. We talked about what makes them return and why they've never gone to church. And one of the things that one guy said was, I've never gone to church because I was never invited. And so he always saw it like church was a club that you you went to, and he was like, and I've never gone to that club because no one's ever invited me to it. And it kind of really just struck me about that idea of how do we invite people to come and be a part of the story of the gospel? How do we invite people to come and participate? As Jesus said, come, follow, or how he engaged and bumped into people, and he kind of deviates from the path it seems that he's on to engage with others. And I was kind of always just aware of that. And yeah, boxing has kind of been birthed through that essence of all of that, really.
In my experience, there's quite a lot of overlap between chaplaincy and pioneering. Like for me, it was when my vocation was shaped. But obviously there's chaplaincy in sort of institutions like the military or the hospitals or schools or whatever, or universities. And then there's chaplaincy in more freeform styles that I think, you know, there are certain characteristics that are different between those two broad brushstrokes. But yeah, like kind of, I think it's a really rich place to explore pioneering and to model kind of that element of relationship building and being alongside people, like just being there for them, like without so for me, one of the big things about pioneering is yeah, we're not telling people this is how you do church, you know. It's like what emerges from this relationship, like what questions come out when you're sat at the bar with a pint in your hand, you know. Like that's when people are processing stuff in their lives. Like, are you there? And how can you then, I think it was Joe said something about like calling out the kingdom, like signposting people and saying, oh look, you know, they don't always have the language for the spirituality that's going on in their lives. So there's something about chaplaincy that gives permission to kind of engage on that level without like trying to, you know, hook them into our kind of formal like church settings where there's so much baggage usually. Or maybe not, you know, maybe it's just as simple as, you know, it's a place that they think they don't belong because no one's ever invited them. But there's that work to do that. Doesn't assume that we've got all the answers, like that we can discover God together in normal life rather than having to come to a special place to do it. Not that he can't be found in that special place, because clearly he can, but he's not limited to it.
I think it goes back to what David said about kind of the guest-host relationship, because that's where kind of chaplaincy and pioneering are so similar, that it is about being a guest in someone else's space. And I often use the language of chaplain when I talk about what I do here in my context, because people seem to understand that more, I guess, than the pioneering. But it is waiting to be invited into someone's space and being really respectful of that. And, you know, I'm not here to kind of, you know, force my faith on people, but I'm here, I guess, you know, as God's agent. I want to listen to people, you know, I want to be able to support people, and that looks different for different people. But I mean, Derby, in Derby, we've got a city centre chaplaincy, and that really is in all sectors. You know, it's shops, businesses, the football club. You know, really, there's chaplains everywhere, and I think that's amazing. It's the church, you know, going out into the world, and I've recently read a book called A Nazareth Manifesto by Sam Wells, and he talks about the concept of being with, and he puts a lot of emphasis on the kind of first 30 years of Jesus's life. You know, we read in the New Testament all about, you know, these 3 years of Jesus' ministry, but what was Jesus doing before that? You know, that's a big question. And you know, he was just being with people, being there, and I think that's chaplaincy and also pioneering.
Thank you. Thank you. So nearly time to draw it to a close. So what would be great to hear off each of you is some final words of wisdom and whatever they may be. Some parting thoughts, whether it's any advice for anyone thinking about pioneering as a journey to go on, anyone thinking, about maybe going on as an ordained route, or maybe someone thinking about just saying like maybe this is something for as a lay role. Maybe it's thought about what pioneering actually is, or about what church could be as well. I open it to all those things for you, as broad and as beautiful as it can be. Debbie, would you like to kick us off, please?
You asked for words of wisdom. I haven't got any of that. I just think if there's anybody watching now or looking back at this and just knows that there's something inside them that is tugging and just doesn't necessarily make sense, but still is pulling on them, to explore it further, to just take the steps to begin it, be it that you talk to someone you trust, or pray on it, ask God to open the doors and make it more apparent. In my case, when I asked him to open the doors, he blew them off and made the way really clear in the one time. But like Joe and Susie says, other times it cannot be so clear. But just explore it. Don't be afraid of it. If you feel that something inside you is saying that God is asking you to do something, you might resist it. I've resisted it for a long time, different things, but that just explore it. Just be brave and take those steps, because God will lead you and it will be fine. And you might fail, you might make mistakes, but that's nothing to be afraid of. Making mistakes is fine. How we learn, it's how we get better. And just go for it. That's what I would say. Go for it. You won't regret it.
John.
The picture of the body of Jesus, being part of the body of Christ. And if I'm honest, I'm a simple sort of Welsh country lad, and the whole imagery used to confuse me until I was in St. Paul's Cathedral, and I was going to leave. I've been to visit them, and at the back of St. Paul's Cathedral there's this mosaic of Jesus's face, and each of the mosaic tile was the face of somebody else. And I thought, that's it, isn't it? That's the body of Christ made up of us here on earth. And I believe that, so God needs Christians in every walk of life, so that's an ordained pioneer ministry, whether you're a brickie, a plumber, a boxer, a sparky, a teacher, working out Jesus with a class of 6-year-old children. But just discern what it is you're passionate about. So be faithful to God in the little things, and use the gifts and the skills he's given you to build up that body and to grow it wherever you are. But the one thing I would say is, listening to people here this evening, one of the things I become aware of is very often part of the discernment journey is having people around you who sometimes see things in yourself that you don't see. So perhaps one thing you want to think about this evening is who are the people I have around me who I can trust, who I can start to have these conversations with. These really exciting conversations about who God's calling me to be and what the next steps may be. So God bless you. Yeah, and I hope that if you're watching this, and so if one day we may run into one another, who knows?
Susie.
Well, yeah, I think wisdom might be a push, but I remember when I was, starting to explore this, and I was obviously exploring a call to ordination. And I really resisted it for quite a long time, because I loved what I was doing and I didn't want to leave the sailors, because what would they do without me? But also I didn't want to be the vicar of Dibley, and that was the image in my head, and that was kind of like, that's not who I am. It doesn't make sense. so it really was for me a wild point of obedience, because it was like, that box doesn't look like I would fit in it. and my epiphany came when I realized that God wasn't calling me to fit into a box. He was calling me who I was, who I already was, and who I will become. And that might not look like anyone else out there, and that's exactly why he's calling me, because no one else can do it. So I think that thing about comparison being, you know, the thief of joy, but also of vocation, you know, like don't worry. I mean, it's easy to say that from my position now. It's been a bit of a journey to get here, for sure, but like, it's not about trying to be like other people that you see doing this, particularly in pioneering. It's about what unique gift you've got. And CMS, they talk about the gift of not fitting in, and that I think, you know, really resonates with a lot of pioneers I know, that actually what is precious and beautiful about their offering of their vocation to the church is that it's not what we already have.
Joe.
Similar to Susie, really. I think for me, what I found personally really difficult is not looking at what other people are doing and feeling like I should be doing that, or, you know, is what I'm doing good enough, or and things like that. And I think what I've had to learn to do is trust myself, but more than trust myself, trust that, you know, that God is working in my life, and God is speaking to me in various ways, even if it's not obvious and audible or whatever, you know, it's happening. And I think, you know, along the way, I found it difficult not to be kind of pulled in other directions because of you know, external pressures and what I think people want of me, or what I think I should be doing. And yeah, if you're struggling right now to really discern what you should be doing, I think, you know, try and have some faith in yourself that you can hear from God. If that's through other people, you know, great as well, but God will guide you as the same as God has done with, you know, with other people. And I think be really true to who you are. The great thing about pioneering it is so broad. It doesn't look the same. It's completely different for everyone. So you don't have to try and fit in a box. You can just be true to the person that God has created you to be.
And last but not least, David.
Yeah, well, I think my words of wisdom, you should listen to everybody else. I think that's what I would say. Yeah, if there's anything to offer, I would just say, just don't worry about the results. You know, I think we get so hooked up on, maybe because it's a part of being ordained, I don't know, but there's so much about a journey that you can appreciate along the way to get to where you want to get to, or whatever you think you should be getting to, or wherever that may be. But I think you can end up missing a lot on that journey. And I think if you're so guided by results, you might miss a lot of other things that take place along that way. So don't be fearful about the results, and I think fear is often the thing that holds a lot of us back. So don't be afraid that you may see the world slightly different. You may understand it differently. I think what is obvious to pioneers is not obviously obvious to everybody else. And I think that we assume that sometimes it perhaps is, or we are fearful that we are seeing it different or seeing something obvious to us that isn't obvious to everyone else. And I think don't be afraid of that fear that you feel inside, because I think that's obviously maybe God's revealing something to you that he isn't revealing to everybody else. And I think to be cliche, but not cliche in a weird way, but to be prayerful. But I don't mean like eyes closed, but to have eyes open. And to have a heart that is open, and a mind and ears to what's going on, of the goodness of the kingdom that is present in your context, or wherever that may be found.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody on our panel. Thank you, David, Susie, Debbie, John, and Joe. It's been absolutely great to have you here and to share your stories, to share your wisdom and your knowledge, your failures and your joys as well. It's really important to hear, and I know people who've been listening will find it interesting and beneficial as well. If any of what's been mentioned has piqued your interest and you think actually that may be me, then please do get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. As part of the vocations team, it's our job to help guide people in their vocation. So please do get in touch with Beck Stevens as our DDO, or you can drop us a message and that message will get passed on straight away. And next Calling Conversations is the end of next month, and it is on Ordained Ministry, where we will be joined by a deacon, a priest and a bishop. That is not a start of a joke, that is actually who is joining us. So that should be a really good conversation with our bishop here, Bishop Cherry, as well, joining us here. So that would be a really, really good conversation on Ordained Ministry, again specifically thinking of the more traditional ministry as we thought about Pioneer Ministry this month. It's been great to be with you all, and I hope you all have a good evening. Goodbye and see you soon.